I want to let everyone know before we start that this session is going to be recorded. And so you should have a chance to look at it online afterwards, or you can let your colleagues and friends know that if they missed it, they'll have an opportunity to watch it as soon as we get it up on our social media and YouTube. So I want to welcome everyone. You're here to talk about the environmental health and how it connects to nursing. So welcome so much. We are Ontario Nurses for the Environment Interest Group. We're a subgroup of the Registered Nurses of Ontario. We build awareness and advocate for environmental issues in Ontario. And I want to plug too that in 2021 to 2022, we are offering free membership. So usually it costs a bit of money, but this year it's free. So please join us and see what we can do together. I am Jocelyn Radcliffe. I'm the brand new fresh chair of ONE-IIOE. We have a couple other of our exec members helping us here tonight. Dominique is going to help present, as well as Olivia, who has really helped create this, put this together and make this happen tonight. So they'll join in the conversation later on. And if you have questions, if you think of things along the way, feel free to put them in the chat. This is a pretty casual webinar, as you can see. You do have the option to unmute, but we ask you to stay muted until that question period at the end, where we might open it up to you so that we can start a conversation. All right, great. So let's start off with a land acknowledgement. You can change to the next slide, please. Thank you. So you probably heard land acknowledgements before. I'm going to speak from where I am today, knowing that many of you are coming from different places, and this is a chance for you to reflect on whose territory you're on. I'm in the land known as Waterloo. It's on the Haldimand Tract, which is 6 miles on either side of our Grand River. It's a territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and neutral peoples here. And I want to, I'm thinking about land and thinking about the peoples that were here since time immemorial. I want to say happy equinox, to recognize that today is a special day in the seasons, where the day and the night are equal, and it's a special time for many Indigenous peoples. And thinking about the connection to the land and just my role as a settler here too, and the time that I've spent listening, and the need for me to listen, which is hard for me because I really do enjoy talking. But I've been listening a lot and hearing from some elders, George Suey and Robin Wall-Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, and just reflecting on what it means to be connected to the land, and thinking about for myself the need for me to connect to my ancestry and connection to the land as well. And so I invite you all to think a little bit about that, where you come from and your connection to the land on this kind of special day in the seasons. And also note that Truth and Reconciliation Day is coming up on September 30th, and there likely are going to be events happening in your area. So take a look out for those. We're gonna, next slide, please. We're going to talk about a number of things today, really like a broad brush view of what's going on in environmental health, what it is, and then some of the issues related to Ontario, the role of nurses and nursing students, as we are here today, interested or part of a nursing profession, and then talk about some places where you can learn more, because we're only going to graze the surface tonight. There's lots of resources that we'll offer tonight as well. Next slide, please. So a very important thing to recognize is that 24% of all global deaths are linked to the environment. So that's 13.7 million deaths per year. It has a huge impact on our well-being, and that's what brings us here today. Next slide, please. And let's start with talking about what environmental health is. It's a really broad topic. It's all of the physical, chemical, biological factors external to a person, and all the related factors impacting behavior. So many different things, and I'm sure you can think of some of them, and include both the assessment and the control of those environmental factors. And the goal of this work is to prevent disease and create an environment that supports health. Next slide, please. And then you might have heard this term, the ecological determinants of health. And it's a little bit different than talking about the environmental determinants of health, in that it really emphasizes the relationships and the interconnections and the influence of living and non-living systems and processes on our health. So ecosystems and how we're both a part of and influencing those ecosystems includes all those life-sustaining processes like water systems and air, and looks at the interconnections, and also recognizes the inextricable links between the ecology and the social determinants of health. So how they're interconnected, and has a focus again on that complexity and also justice as well. One great example of that would be just how herbicides and pesticides influence the plants and the animals, which then influence the carbon cycle, which influences the food cycle and water cycles. So just really appreciating those connections there. And now I get the opportunity to pass on to Dominique to continue on discussing the environment. Thanks.
It's actually me right now, but that's okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Olivia, there you go.
No worries. Everyone can hear me okay? I'm assuming? Okay. All right, I see a thumbs up. So some impacts of climate change on health. We're seeing an increase in waterborne disease exposure. This is because with ice melting, temperatures rising, we're seeing more evaporation and in some areas increased precipitation. This causes flooding, it causes sewage systems to get backed up, it causes agricultural waste like manures and stuff like that to get swept in with floodwaters. So this can really expose people to things like E. coli in their water. It can expose people to things like Legionnaire's disease. Often waterborne diseases affect the gastrointestinal system. They don't exclusively do that, but that is one reason with climate change we're seeing more waterborne diseases. We're also seeing an increase in cardiovascular and respiratory related hospitalizations from things like wildfire smoke exposure. I'm sure many of you have seen over the course of the last 2 to 3 years in California and British Columbia, we're seeing lots of wildfires and evacuations. We're deploying firefighters from across the country to help deal with those issues. So this is because of rising temperatures. It's causing a lot more of the brush to dry out. We're seeing a lot more severe weather like lightning storms, which can cause sparks to initiate wildfires. So we're seeing a lot more of them. We're seeing a lot more severe wildfires. They can cause eye irritation. They can irritate your sinuses from the particulate matter, exacerbate COPD, asthma, as well as this particulate matter from wildfires from things like carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides. It can cause an inflammatory response in the cardiovascular system if anything inhaled gets into the bloodstream as well. We're seeing a lot more increase in vector-borne diseases. So one that's pretty common for household names is Lyme disease. In part, this is because of warming climates. Areas that were more northern geographically, things like the black-legged tick, they're able to expand their range up from the United States to areas they didn't traditionally live. They're hopping rides on migrating birds that are now able to go even further north as well. We're also seeing more cases of West Nile disease, which was first reported in Canada 2001. We're also tracking in the States that we're seeing in northeastern United States, the type of mosquitoes that carry Zika and dengue fever are coming progressively more northward. We're also seeing longer allergy seasons with greater pollen concentrations, again, affecting those with allergies, underlying respiratory conditions. A lot of pediatric patients struggle with their asthma this times of year, and so now it's getting worse. We also see an increase in suicide rates in the summer and during extreme heat events. Additionally, in our mental health patients, those taking antipsychotics, a lot of the time they have an impaired ability to thermoregulate, or they don't display those mitigating behaviors like putting on a coat in the cold, taking it off when it's hot. And so we see a lot of extreme cold and extreme heat related injuries in those populations. Psychiatry is my background, and we have seen a lot of pretty horrible frostbite come in with our patients on antipsychotics lately. So these are some of the impacts of pollution on health, so a little different than impacts from climate change. So we're seeing those cardiac, respiratory disease profiles as well. From smog and particulate matter, we're seeing that some populations, geriatric populations, those with compromised lungs, they're struggling to live in urban centers where the smog is quite bad now. From things like dioxin pollution, it's a persistent organic pollutant. It's very toxic and it takes a long time to break down in our environment. We're seeing things like difficulties with reproduction, developmental delays in children, and difficulties with hormone regulation, impairments in the immune system, things like that. So we get this dioxin from combustion, burning waste. We also get it in herbicides sometimes. There's been an increase in acute pediatric poisonings from cosmetic and lawn pesticide use. So more calls going out to poison control in emergency room visits. We're seeing more cancer from outdoor air carcinogens. Diesel exhaust has been identified as a carcinogen for causing respiratory cancers. Radon as well is another big one for causing cancer. We're seeing a lot more hearing loss from noise pollution. So to put in perspective, decibels, so what we measure sound in, 70 and under is what's considered safe for routine exposures in people. Routine traffic in a city is expected to be about 80 to 85 decibels. So already that's more noise exposure than is safe for the human ears. And then if you're beside something like a siren for an ambulance or a police vehicle, that's estimated to be about 120 decibels. So over prolonged periods of time, it can cause real damage to your hearing. We're seeing a lot of heavy metal poisoning. For example, lead, think of Flint, Michigan, and all those places where they're struggling to have water that they can drink. Perhaps they have lead in their homes from paint, from old pipes. We see mercury poisoning, arsenic poisoning. We also see a lot of issues with the ingestion of microplastics. This can occur through eating seafood. It's not the only way, but a lot of fish that we eat, they prey on smaller fish as well that may have eaten plastic. So that bioaccumulation, it gets worse near the top of the food chain of those plastics that are sitting around in your system. So these are a few Ontario-specific environmental issues. I mentioned Ontario just because our group is under the ONE-IIOE, which is a provincial organization. So because of pollution from Sudbury nickel mining and smelting, we're seeing a lot of issues where people, their paint is coming off their house faster, it's damaging vehicles due to acid rain. I know that they've lost a lot of the biodiversity in lakes. Killarney through Birds Canada, I know I've participated in loon counts with them because they're a great bioindicator of health of a lake, and a lot of them fled the Sudbury and greater Sudbury area a few years ago. We're seeing a lot more blue-green algae blooms across the province, but particularly in the Great Lakes as well. These blooms, they can cause seizures, they can cause muscle cramps, GI upset, confusion. It can kill animals like dogs if you let them swim in it, depending on how concentrated those toxins are. So these blooms are largely believed to occur because of increased fertilizer pollutions and phosphorus in the water and increased temperatures. We're seeing drainings of provincially significant wetlands. I know right now Environmental Defense is trying to go to court over these particular wetlands here, which are in the York region. When we drain wetlands, we increase our likelihood of flooding in residential areas. We decrease overall water quality. It also impacts the economy. We have less ability to do any recreation. We can't fish in those areas. We can't do tourism in those areas. we're increasing our likelihood of contracting waterborne diseases due to the flooding that we see. And we're also seeing an increase in invasive species like zebra mussels, purple loosestrife, and the emerald ash borers. Each of those species have a different impact on a different type of ecosystem. Our little picture on the corner is of what a zebra mussel does look like. So these invasive species, they destroy biodiversity, they impact our agriculture, our water quality, they introduce foreign disease to our habitats, and they reduce our soil productivity in a lot of regions as well. So just some roles for nurses and nursing students. This can also be passed along if you aren't a nurse, perhaps you're a PSW, maybe you hire nurses or in general are in the healthcare field. It's important to educate your patients and care partners on how to mitigate environmental hazards they may come across in their daily lives, to advocate for policy changes and sustainable practices. This can be through joining organizations like the ONE-IIOE, such as the CNA, the Canadian Nurses Association. It can be in your own time as well, independently. Also, showing leadership in clinical practices and for managing waste and your environmental impact where you work is very important. You can engage in research for more sustainable equipment in nursing practices. If you consider a lot of what we've done during the COVID pandemic for infection control, we have tons of single-use plastic that has been entering the environment. And then other things we can do is we can volunteer on things like hospital green teams, or we can volunteer in citizen science projects in our own time. It doesn't have to be exclusively geared to the healthcare field. So these are some nursing considerations. I know when I first kind of got into environmental health, I struggled a bit with how do I apply this as a frontline nurse to my own practice. But if you consider things like what teaching can I provide to a patient that's being discharged back home to a boil water advisory? How do they encourage hygiene with their kids if they don't have safe water? How are they washing their vegetables? Some places you rely on tap water for wound care, and how do you do that if it's contaminated to varying degrees? What steps can you take for patients to mitigate heat-related illnesses and cardiovascular strains during heat waves? If you have a patient that comes in who suffered a heart attack largely because of strain from the heat, if you discharge them back to the community, how do you mitigate the exact same thing happening again, putting them in environments that has been unchanged? What behaviors can they do to avoid any undue risk to themselves? You can look at food waste in your place of work. It doesn't have to be a hospital, it could be anywhere. See if you have a compost program, how robust your recycling program is, what they do with food waste, etc. Are you using certified green disinfectants? Or other things like what mental health impacts might be associated with your patient who has stressors like living in an active flood zone. They're worried about their child drowning each season. And how do you mitigate things like that? Okay. Dominique, was this one still me, or is this one where you start? It's me still? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. So just a brief case study for pandemics. We are in the middle of one. So there has been some study about what environmental and climate factors contribute to pandemics. So some things that we see are deforestation causes habitat loss. It causes other species to live in close proximity to humans. This raises risk of zoonotic transmission. It's believed that for Ebola, that bats having to live progressively closer to people as we destroyed their habitat might have been one of the reasons that we saw that shift in the disease. Respiratory diseases from poor air quality makes it harder for the immune system to fight against infection. So if you're someone where your baseline for breathing is quite poor already, in part because you live in an area with lots of smog, it makes it harder for you to fight off something like COVID. Current mass livestock agriculture practices, so having tons of chickens in a small area or lots of cows in an area, it increases the likelihood of spreading disease both between the people working there and between the animals themselves. consider how important social distancing has really been during this pandemic, and consider in these complexes, it isn't possible for both the workers or for the livestock to be able to socially distance. Another thing that has been considered is that often the most resilient species that survive extinction events, they're more likely to serve as vectors that affect humans for disease. So things like rats and cockroaches do a good job of surviving very extreme conditions, but we're going to lose a lot of those other species that are very endemic to certain regions. They do a good job of living where they do, but they can't adapt as well. Okay, and I think this is where I pass off to Dominique now.
Thanks so much, Olivia. So next we're going to talk about water quality in First Nations communities, which we know has been a prevalent issue for many, many years now. I'll be referencing an article from the Conversation Academic Journal, which was written by Corinna Daly-Starna on November 26, 2020. So in October 2020, more than 250 members of the Nisga'a First Nation community were evacuated to Thunder Bay after an oily sheen was found on their water reservoir. This left the community without access to running water. This evacuation drew attention to the federal government's 2015 commitment to end on all on-reserve long-term drinking water advisories that have been in place for more than 1 year. By March 31st, 2021, however, Nisga'a has been living under a boil water advisory for more than 26 years. And from what we know, this is longer than any other First Nation community in Canada. According to the Government of Canada, as of August 28th, 2021, there are 51 long-term drinking water advisories in effect in 32 communities. Nisga'a is still one of them. So the government often quantifies water advisories, but not their effects on the physical, spiritual, and holistic well-being of First Nations communities. So First Nations community water advisories connects to so many other issues that need to be addressed as well. So for example, evacuations, if there is a water advisory, those can be detrimental to the relationships between families and friends as you're splitting them apart. And excessive water boiling can create mold in homes, which deteriorates housing and can cause overcrowding. And that in turn, that can contribute to infections like MRSA, and that can be very contagious as well and spread. And because communities are buying water bottles because they don't have access to clean water, this reduces the amount of money that they can actually spend on food, which is a necessity. So this creates this domino effect, which is devastating. Ultimately, root causes of water advisories are embedded in colonialism and the forced relocation of many communities to areas where there is strain placed on water supplies, and that's primarily due to resource extraction. So in the future, it's imperative that the government understands the specific needs of Indigenous communities to address this issue once and for all. It's been ongoing for many, many, many years, but water is a basic human right. Everybody should have access to it. It's really upsetting that we don't have clean water in Indigenous communities, but hopefully soon. And there are some YouTube videos as well that CBC did some coverage of about Nisga'a if you guys are curious about learning more. Next slide, please. So we have some resources here to help you learn more about the environment, how you can make a change in your community. So the first one is Nurses Drawdown, Project Guidelines of Nurses for Healthy Environments and Project Drawdown. So this encourages nurses to take action in 4 key areas. First one is energy, so supporting a clean energy future. Second is food, so committing to like a plant-based diet, reducing your food waste, all that good stuff. Third is mobility, reducing your carbon footprint, using bikes, walking instead of using a car. Gender equity, so educating children and family planning. And then nature-based solutions, which is like planting trees, protecting our forests, and protecting tropical forests as well. Second is the Canadian Association of Nurses for the Environment. And this is dedicated to the improvement of environmental health across all domains of nursing practice, policy, research, and education. We have Environment and Climate Change Canada. We have Nurse Climate Challenge, which aims to mobilize nurses to educate health professionals about the health impacts of climate change. We have ONEG, or Ontario Nurses for the Environment Interest Group. That's us, yay! So we represent RNs in Ontario who wish to work together towards improving environmental health. We engage, educate, empower others to take action as individuals, partners, and communities. And our big mission is to eliminate the link between the environment and health. And then we have the CDC as well, which has some environmental health media toolkits. So you guys can check those out if you're interested. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just some steps everyone can take to help improve environmental health. Just some daily things that you can start to invest your time in would be like buying seasonal local produce, like going to your farmer's market, using natural light, turning off your lights during the day, open up the windows, let in the fresh air, reducing your food waste. Maybe you have a compost or something like that. Line drying your clothing instead of using the dryer because that uses a lot of gas and energy. Unplugging your unused chargers. I know like I'm really bad for that. Like I just leave everything plugged in, but try and unplug them if you're not using them to help save energy. You can participate in projects, avoiding single-use plastics. That's one thing I like to do as well, like with like reusable bags or reusable produce bags, reusable cotton pads, like glass containers, stuff like that. Like everything makes a difference. Having a plant-based diet. One cool thing is, I don't know if anybody's heard of Ecosia, but it's a search engine, and every time you use it, the ad revenue goes towards planting trees. So it's super cool, super cool. Better than your Google Chrome. So use it if you can. Also using native plants in gardens, not planting invasive species, installing energy saving devices like your bulbs and your shower heads, all the good stuff. Buying multi-purpose toys instead of buying a bunch of toys for your kids if you can. Kids love toys. Voting in elections, taking action, donating charities, all that good stuff. Recommend joint statements. Oh, just saw your comment there, Hilda. Yeah, SELA is great as well. I'm surprised we didn't have SELA on there, but the Canadian Environmental Law Association, they're huge. We work with them as well, and they're so awesome. We can put their link in there. If someone can do that, that would be awesome, just to share more information about SELA. Yeah, and then there's some media here as well, like some short films or documentaries that you guys can learn more about. So first one is the True Cost documentary. So this is actually a film about fast fashion and exploring the impact of fashion on people and the planet. Because a lot of the times fashion can exploit a lot of workers and it's not good. And focusing on like thrifting to things like that, sustainable, it's better. So that's a documentary about fashion and the planet. The second one is Before the Flood. It has Leonardo DiCaprio in it, if anybody's wondering. So this one talks about all of the dramatic changes occurring around the world due to climate change, as well as the actions as we as individuals and society can take to prevent the destruction of life on our planet. Next one is Cowspiracy. That's on Netflix. It was on YouTube, it got removed from YouTube, so now it's just on Netflix. And that explores the impact of animal agriculture on the environment and why this has been ignored by many major environmental groups, so it's interesting. Next one is The Story of Stuff. So we all have a lot of stuff. I think we're all guilty of that. So it's a look at the underside of our production and consumption patterns and how we have those connections between exposes the connections between a huge number of environmental social issues and calls us to make a more sustainable and just world with less stuff. And then The Story of Plastic, kind of a similar idea. So to look into the environmental damage and human rights issues that occur throughout the life cycle of plastic. So go check those out if you're interested. Some of these are short films. So I think Before the Flood, that one's like an hour and a half, but most of them are like short films. Yes, Victoria. Yes, Seaspiracy. That one's interesting too on Netflix. So actually watched that one too. So it's about like the fishing industry and its impacts on the environment and our oceans. It's a really good documentary. So that's also on Netflix if anybody's interested. Seaspiracy. And then some continuing education opportunities as well, if anybody's interested. A lot of these are free to go check them out. So the first one is the International Transformational Resilience Coalition. And this one has like 3 different workshops. I believe they have for free 1-hour introductory workshop. I'm not sure if the rest of them are free, but the first one is a transformational resilience workshop. And these help individuals and groups cope with acute trauma and chronic toxic stress directly and indirectly generated by climate change and other adversities. And then there's the Leadership for Resilience workshop, which focuses on teaching these skills to community leaders. And then there's a Building Resilient Organizations and Communities workshop, which is about fostering those resilience enhancing entities. So that's that first one. And the second one is MAC Health by McMaster University. And there's like a bunch of free programs with this one. 2 that we're going to touch on is the radon and extreme heat events. So the radon one lets you learn about how to reduce radon exposure with your patients and in your home. And the extreme heat events program helps give like healthcare providers better tools to prevent and manage heat-related illnesses. But there's like a whole bunch on there, and most of them are free and they're tailored towards healthcare providers like nurses. There's also ONE-IIOE by the World Health Organization. This has more free courses. One is cholera, I never say it right. And this gives you a general introduction to cholera. And then there's waste management, which like learn about the different types of waste management and the process for waste management, which is very interesting. There's Guelph Open Ed. This one's tailored to students, I believe. So this one has a certificate in environmental conservation available. And that should be free as well. And then there's the Government of Canada, which has the public health emergency preparedness and response training. So it's like all encompassing. And then there's the CDC Environment Health Services. It has a e-learning series. So there's free programs, which include topics such as like vector control for environmental health professionals, safe water program improvement, e-learning series, and then there's an environmental public health online course as well. So go check them out. And then lastly here, I'm just going to touch on some career options. So we know with nursing, there's a bunch of opportunities you can do with nursing. There's like endless opportunities, but some here, we have our occupational health nursing, public health nursing, nurse educator, like professors at universities, colleges, nursing consultants, response nurses or disaster preparedness nurses, nursing officers in the armed forces, or nursing researchers. So these are just some opportunities for nursing. What we're just trying to emphasize here is that no matter what profession you go into, the environment is going to be involved in some way. Climate change is going to be involved in some way, and you have the ability to advocate for a healthier planet and a healthier life within your nursing profession. So no matter what you do, you can advocate for a healthier planet. Yay. Awesome. I'll pass it back to Olivia to finish off our webinar.
Thank you so much. Well, kind of in conclusion, this was an introduction into a lot of broad topics. Each one that we spoke about, you can do a whole deep dive in. You can build a whole career or research thesis out of just about every topic we've mentioned. But the environment and climate change, they do largely affect human health. They obviously as well affect the health of the other organisms that we share the planet with. And the environment accounts for a large percentage of deaths each year worldwide. It's an increasingly important topic to address for healthcare providers. It should be more integrated into educational curriculums. I know in the last little bit that the, CASN has put out a new guideline for vector-borne illnesses for bachelor's level nursing education to focus on bringing that more into the curriculum. I know when I was in school, environmental health was not on the radar at all, and I was not in school that long ago, but it wasn't a topic that we went over by any means. And then there are steps that every person can take to address climate change. It doesn't need to be a nurse, it doesn't necessarily need to be a nursing student, it can just be anyone in their daily lives. I know that everyone that has spoken here today does involve themselves in other projects, other volunteer work, other research outside of just ONEG to promote the environment as well. So there is lots that you can do out there. All right, so I'll open it up for questions, but we do have a few social media accounts now. Our Instagram and Twitter are newer, I believe. The Facebook has been a little more long-standing. We do have a website and an email, so if you have any questions afterwards that you can't think of right now, feel free to reach out to us on any of these platforms, and then we can try to help you as best we can. We also have general members. So again, like Jocelyn mentioned, if you are interested in joining as a general member, then by all means, we'd be happy to have you. I'll also just show though, here's the references, everyone's favorite parts.
We do have one question that came in from Paula. Oh, I've lost it, but I'm sure you can see the chat now because it's switched over to me. She was asking about us taking political positions or policy positions as RNEO, or us as part of RNEO, and RNEO is the large organization, and saying it's a perfect time to start advocating or push again on advocating for ending boil water advisories. I definitely agree with that. I wonder if anyone else here, if Dominique or Olivia wants to speak to boil water advisory. Maybe Dominique, since you were looking into that, maybe you want to speak about what that could look like.
Yeah, so I think so with ONEG, we have resolutions that are passed each year as well. I know we had our water resolution passed last year. And so it would be great if we could do that because it's such a huge issue and water is necessary. So I think we could definitely incorporate that hopefully in one of our future resolutions. And we're always actively working towards that, like with our water resolution, that was part of that as well. But I think specifically in Indigenous communities, it should be addressed too. So I totally agree with you, Paula. And we do have like Olivia and I are like the policy and political action executives on ONEG. So we kind of like work with like Jocelyn and then the rest of the team on different policies, and we do like little papers and things and stuff here and there to advocate. Thanks for your question.
Yeah, and RNAO has actually expressed like they have Indigenous community partners as well. So some of that work is going on behind the scenes, like the ways that RNAO might be able to work on these issues as well. After our water resolution put through, it just kind of helped encourage that work. Now I see another question come in. Yeah, this is an important issue right now, and more and more people are talking about eco-anxiety, Kelsey. And any thoughts on interventions? I think, Olivia, this would be a great question for you because it is kind of a mental health question. Any thoughts on nursing interventions for climate or eco-anxiety? And Kelsey's noticing that mental health effects, she's noticing the mental health effects it's having on youth that she works with.
So a big thing just to start with for people is emotional validation, which we do learn in nursing. While doing that, it's important to validate feelings and maybe not maladaptive behaviors that some people might display as a result of these anxieties, like maybe they're becoming more self-seclusive and things like that. But it is important to address some of the underlying concerns they have. Like while climate change is happening, there are some mitigating factors that people can take to kind of protect themselves. If you're concerned about things like radon, you can get a kit for measuring radon in your home, and depending on the readings, there are certified professionals that can help adjust the levels in your home. If they're concerned about things like flooding, you can connect them with like free swim lessons or maybe subsidies for things like life jackets and how to put together an emergency response kit. Extreme heat, you can give them teaching on checking the heat index and other tools like that, checking weather advisories and following those government recommendations on certain days. So you can give them teaching for mitigating some of those things that are happening. I know a lot of people have anxiety about the like loss of control they have over climate change, but really trying to get them to focus on what they can do for protecting themselves and their loved ones is important. And then from that, kind of building in the mental health piece. I know that there are different therapies that you can take, cognitive behavioral therapies, depending on your counselor. They might actually have a specialist in things like ecotherapy, or have more of a background in environmental issues too. So it's a pretty broad answer, but definitely get like a full history on your patient as well. You might see some PTSD or trauma in people that have lost their homes to floods. And then if you have social workers or other kind of those professions available, they're good for finding out what subsidies are available to those individuals for proper PPE, making sure their homes are safe, if there's any flood relief stuff, et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks so much, Olivia. That was a really thorough answer with lots of possible paths that could be taken. And I see Hilda's mentioning, I think you're talking about the boil water advisories about political parties on board. And I think we heard during this election a lot of people talking about the need to end those boil water advisories. And I think talking to your MPP or MP about it is super important and something that we can all do. But I think the urgency and the kind of on the ground work is what we really need to push for, because a lot of them have stated that that's important, but it's taken a really long time to get action. And Victoria just talking about what a shame it is that we're not talking more about environmental health in nursing, and that seems to be the movement is happening, right? We're seeing things start to shift, so that's the positive side. And we all start having conversations and we realize how integral it is, conversations like these. And global health. Yeah, Christine's mentioning global health and that piece in nursing. And I remember learning some about it, like about, you know, the work that can be done at that scale or in different areas. Yeah, and I think actually that brings up planetary health, which is kind of an approach that considers our health in such a broad way, and a climate fits so well into that, because it's not just a provincial or national issue. It's like literally the health of the planet and the actions that we do here impacting systems that affect people all around the world. And then global health, of course, there's so much within that. And I don't know, Christine, if you even want to talk about what you're thinking about within global health, if there's certain areas, feel free to unmute yourself. It's okay if not, I'll give you a minute.
Can you hear me? There, yeah, I think it's working.
Yeah.
I always have myself double muted because I'm just really paranoid about accidentally coming through. But just my, so I'm from the Nipissing nursing program. I think Madeline here as well is also we're both from the same program. And we had a global health project, and it was really, most of us, I think my group was actually the only group who took more of the environmental perspective of it, because we had water scarcity in Australia, and we compared it to Canada among both their Indigenous people, which was really interesting because it was both their Indigenous people who were the most severely affected by water scarcity. So it's cool to see the parallels and what's being done in both countries. But just in general, global health, I know some of the other groups talked about, what was it? Just various like socioeconomic stuff and social issues and stuff. And it would be cool to see more. Like, I don't think most of the groups went to the environmental perspective because it's not something that's really taught to like nursing students. I mean, I have like the public health background. So to me, when I thought of global health, I'm like, what's going on in the environment right now? Like, what can we do? But that's definitely something that we'd like to see talked about more for sure.
I know that there's also the One Health approach as well that some people are endorsing, which really focuses on integrating like animal welfare as well, and taking information from veterinarians, veterinary nurses, animal rehabilitators, etc. Like, I know I was recently researching Lyme disease for a blog post elsewhere, and vets are actually more likely to report Lyme disease and submit ticks to public health agencies than doctors are when they did a survey. So using some of their data and recognizing that it also has validity to human health, and it's kind of all integrated.
Yeah, I remember learning about the One World, One Health perspective in my public health studies. And the Lyme disease thing is really interesting. My mom's good friends with a doctor who does a lot of stuff with McMaster and kind of their health promotion stuff. And I guess there used to be a Lyme disease vaccine for people back in the 90s, I think, but then it was pulled off the market for some reason. And now you only have like the tick stuff for dogs. It's kind of interesting to see why. Hopefully maybe that'll change now that we're seeing a lot more Lyme disease because it's such a big issue.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And I think that's an important perspective to think about, just the way that we approach health and nursing. We have eco-health, One World, One Health, planetary health, and like you were mentioning too, about about the connections between animal health and human health. And I think those are really important areas. And nutrition, Victoria. what were you learning about in nutrition? Like the environmental connection in terms of nutrition, like the plant-based diet, or maybe you can speak to that if you're available, Victoria. Maybe she isn't, but if you're not, that's okay. Oh,
I think she's out of the call. I'm not sure if
oh.
she's or whatnot. Yeah.
That's too bad, but I think that's another great avenue to lead to thinking more about the environment is through when we talk about nutrition, we talk about diets and the influence on human body, the connection socially, culturally, spiritually for many, and then also how the environment connects to food and nutrition, the threats to it, and also the great benefits when we care for the environment and protect land. That's such a great discussion. Thank you so much. I hear you guys, you're talking about whether we can post, you can share it once we get this edited and up on the internet, definitely. So watch our social media because we will share that video is available and where you can find it as soon as that happens. Shouldn't be too long. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, with 300 home care nurses. I think that's great, Paula. I think that would be great if you could share. Absolutely, extreme weather events held in I see what you're saying there. Yeah, there are so many, like, and that includes like heat, drought, precipitation of all kinds, you know, freeze thaw events. They're all impacting food. Yeah, so thanks, Paula. Thanks so much, everyone. We have a little bit more time if anyone has any more comments or thoughts. Maybe these topics have brought anything up for our other presenters, Dominique and Olivia. I wonder if you want to add any final thoughts. Maybe Dominique first.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for like the questions and participation. I'm glad we had some discussions at the end of that, and I'm glad everyone was able to come. I hope you learned something or gained some insight, or I know I learned something.
Absolutely, I did as well. And for final thoughts, maybe we'll move on to Olivia. Thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. I think the format went well. It's a little more informal, which I think works better for me, my personality. But yeah, like I mentioned earlier, every topic that we touched on, whether it's invasive species, the availability of food, whether it's dioxin pollution, whether it's indigenous access to water and how colonization impacted that, like those are all huge topics within themselves. It's impossible to really do any of them justice all together in a 1 hour bit. But if anyone here is really particularly interested in one specific topic, there is tons out there, both for volunteering information. You don't need to necessarily read journals to understand what's going on. Like some of the videos that we showed you are a good springboard as well for getting into research.
All right, and with that, I think we're going to say a good night to everyone. So again, we're so grateful for your participation, for your ears, for coming along with us. And we would love to have more conversations. If you want us to come and do a talk, ask us. We'll see what we can do. Maybe you have a certain subject that you're interested in. But definitely join us. Join us as a member with ONE-IIOE, or just follow us and hear what we're doing and see if you can help out with some of the work we're doing as well. So good night all, and thanks again.